Franklin Hayes had everything: wealth, power, and a name that echoed through Chicago's skyline. But there was one thing his money couldn't fix: his son, Tyler, paralyzed from a skiing accident. Every day, Franklin pushed Tyler through the city, haunted by the silence between them. But what if the key to his son walking again wasn't science, but something much more unexpected? Stay with us to discover a story of hope, healing, and a life-changing encounter. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. This is a journey you won't want to miss. Franklin's hands tightened on the wheelchair's handles, the leather feeling colder than it had ever been before. Every time he pushed Tyler through the streets, a silent weight seemed to settle over him. His son's once bright eyes now stared blankly ahead, fixated on cracks in the sidewalk as if trying to find something, anything, to cling to in a world that felt so out of reach. Franklin had been here before, walking this same alley off Clark Street, but never like this. Never with the hum of Tyler's wheelchair wheels drowning out the familiar city noise, the bustling sounds of taxis honking, street vendors shouting, and the chatter of 1,000 voices all seemed distant now, muffled by the heavy silence between father and son. And what made it worse, what gnawed at Franklin's soul, was that it didn't matter how many doctors he consulted, how many treatments they tried. Tyler would never walk again. That cold truth hit him like a punch to the gut every time he saw his son's unsteady hands gripping the armrests, as if holding on to something that wasn't there. Tyler hadn't asked for anything in weeks, no. New video games, no candy, no requests to go outside and play. Instead, he had withdrawn, shutting himself off from the world, as though accepting the prison his body had become. And Franklin, as powerful and influential as he was, could do nothing but watch. He could do nothing but feel the relentless sting of his own impotence. It was on this same day, this ordinary, miserable day, that something changed. Franklin was walking past the familiar alley again when he heard it. A voice, soft yet steady. "I know how to make your son walk again." He froze. The words hung in the air for a beat, too incredible, too impossible to believe. His head turned sharply to where the voice had come from. There, standing just beyond a dented recycling bin, was a girl. Franklin squinted, unsure of what he was seeing. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, but there was something in her eyes, something beyond her years, that stopped him, cold. She was no more than a scrawny child in a torn hoodie, the fabric worn thin by time and the streets. Her shoes were patched up with duct tape, and dirt streaked across her face, but her posture was straight. No slouch, no hint of fear. Just a quiet, unwavering certainty. "I can help your son," the girl repeated, her voice unchanged, as if the words were not a claim, but an obvious truth. Franklin's first instinct was to dismiss her, to turn and walk away like he had with so many others who had tried to sell him hope wrapped in false promises. But something in the way she stood, so unshaken, caught his attention. Her big brown eyes met his, and for a brief moment he saw something almost too real to name, a spark of possibility. He let out a breath and, without thinking, stepped toward her, his eyes scanning the alley, as though expecting some trick, some hidden camera. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice rough, filled with suspicion. The girl didn't flinch. She took a slow step forward. "I saw you yesterday," she said, her gaze dropping briefly to Tyler. "Your son, he looked really sad. I thought, maybe you'd—" "Listen." Tyler, who had barely responded to anything in the past few weeks, looked at her now, not with fear, not with pity, but with a spark of curiosity, as if something about this strange girl made him feel seen for the first time in a long time. Franklin's heart raced. He looked at Tyler, then back at the girl. "You've been watching us?" he asked, more out of disbelief than anger. "A little," she said, shrugging lightly. "I sit here some days. A lot of people walk by, but you stopped. You didn't just rush off. You picked up the glove Tyler dropped. I thought maybe you'd listen." Franklin felt a flicker of something in his chest, A pang of guilt. He had been so caught up in his own hopelessness, so buried in the feeling of being a failure as a father, that he had failed to even notice the people around him. He had rushed, always trying to fix things, fix Tyler, fix his life. But in the midst of that, he hadn't even stopped to see the pain in his son's eyes, or the hope that maybe, just maybe, someone could help him heal. Tyler's voice broke through his thoughts, small and fragile, but full of longing. "Dad, maybe we could just go see." Franklin felt his throat tighten. It was the first time in weeks that Tyler had asked for something, anything. It was a request that, in its simplicity, shattered him. He closed his eyes, exhaled, the weight of a decision hanging over him. "If anything feels wrong," he began, his voice trailing off as he looked down at Tyler, "we're leaving." Tyler nodded, his eyes wide, almost pleading, but there was something in his gaze, a silent promise, that made Franklin hesitate and then nod. The girl smiled, a quiet, almost knowing smile. "Follow me." And so, they did. The suspense continued to build as Franklin pushed Tyler through streets that grew darker, rougher, more forgotten. Each turn they made seemed further from everything they knew, further from the life they had once lived. Franklin's mind raced with 1,000 doubts. Where was she taking them? What was she even talking about? Was he making a mistake? But then, just as the doubts reached their peak, they arrived at an old, weathered courtyard. The building looming before them was half hidden by ivy, its walls crumbling under the weight of years. The door creaked open without a knock. No turning. Back now. Inside, the air was heavy with an unfamiliar stillness. The only light came from the cracks in the ceiling, where sunlight filtered through like a soft, fading memory. And there, sitting on a worn rug, was an older woman, silver hair tied up in a bun as large as a grapefruit. "I was wondering when you'd bring him," she said, her voice as smooth as river stones. Eyes full of knowledge Franklin couldn't yet grasp. He stiffened. "How did you—" "I don't know the future, sir," she replied, "but I know pain when it walks through my door." And in that moment, Franklin realized this wasn't just another street hustle. Something far more powerful was at work here, something he couldn't explain, something that might just save his son. As Franklin and Tyler followed the strange girl, Laya, through the dark alleys, a mix of confusion, worry, and skepticism churned inside Franklin. Every turn they took seemed to lead them deeper into a part of the city he didn't recognize. The comforting hum of the busy streets had long faded, replaced by the eerie quiet of the forgotten corners of Chicago. Tyler sat silently, clutching the sides of his wheelchair, but there was a subtle shift in his demeanor. It wasn't the usual resigned stillness. It was hope. Still, Franklin couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. His mind raced with all the possibilities. What if this was a trick? What if Laya wasn't some miracle worker but just another street kid trying to take advantage of him? But then he remembered the look in Tyler's eyes, the curiosity, the longing. His son, who hadn't asked for anything in over a year, was finally asking for something that made him believe in the impossible. As they reached the narrow courtyard, a sense of unease settled deeper in Franklin's gut. He glanced at Laya as she opened the door, stepping into the darkness without hesitation. What kind of place was this? Who were these people, really? Suddenly, the door creaked open. A tall, thin figure appeared in the dim light. It was a man. He was standing in the doorway of an apartment complex across the courtyard, his eyes locked on them, his posture stiff, as though he'd been watching them for a while. He was older, late 50s maybe. A weathered face, gray hair at the temples, and a pair of dark, cautious eyes. The moment their gazes met, Franklin's heart skipped a beat. There was something about the man's look, something that gave Franklin pause. "Is everything all right?" the man called out, his voice gruff and low. It wasn't the first time Franklin had heard a voice like that on the streets of the city, a voice that carried the weight of years of knowing the truth about the world. The voice of someone who had seen too much, someone who'd been part of the system but never quite bought into it. Franklin stopped, unsure of how to respond. He'd been so absorbed in following Laya that he hadn't noticed the man until now. He glanced at Laya, who remained calm, unfazed by the man's presence. "We're fine," Franklin said, his voice tight with irritation, not wanting to explain himself to a stranger. The man's gaze shifted to Tyler, who was still in the wheelchair, his eyes vacant but fixed on the ground. Franklin's chest tightened. He knew what this man was thinking. He could see the judgment in his eyes, the unspoken thoughts that danced behind those watchful eyes. The man had seen this before, a rich man pushing his son around trying to buy his way out of pain. But Franklin had been there, had fought in the boardrooms, had built his empire from the ground up. And now, none of it mattered. He was just a father trying to save his son. The man took a few steps forward, his boots crunching against the gravel. "You should be careful, you know," he said quietly, his voice softening, as though sharing a secret with Franklin. "Not all help is good help." Franklin narrowed his eyes, his heart beginning to beat faster. "What do you mean?" he asked, the tension rising in his voice. The man looked around, making sure no one was listening, then leaned in closer. "I've seen that girl around here before. I know her kind. They come and go, always with some kind of promise. But most of them—" He hesitated, his voice dropping lower. "Most of them are just running away from something. Running from the system, from people like you." He gestured vaguely to Franklin. "People who can't fix everything with money." Franklin stood frozen for a moment, the words hanging heavy in the air. He didn't know what to make of the man's warning. Was he trying to protect him, or was he just another person who resented people like Franklin for not understanding the struggles of the streets? "She's helping my son," Franklin said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't quite name. His mind was spinning with anger and confusion. He didn't need some stranger telling him what he already knew. What he needed was answers. He needed something to hold on to. The man sighed, stepping back, his eyes softening slightly. "I can see you care about your kid. But this—" He gestured to the doorway, the dark hallway beyond it. "This isn't the place for him. Trust me, kid, I've seen too many good people get swallowed up by places like this." Franklin felt a sharp pang in his chest. The man was right. The street had always been a place for the forgotten, the ones who had nowhere else to go, the ones whose cries for help fell on deaf ears. Franklin had spent so much of his life building wealth and power, believing that money could solve everything. But in this moment, he felt completely powerless. Was this the reality of the world he had spent his entire life trying to escape? Laya's voice cut through his thoughts. "Franklin," she said softly, her tone firm but gentle, "we're not here to hurt anyone. We're here to help." Franklin looked at her, his heart racing. She had been quiet this entire time, observing him, perhaps sensing his doubt. But now, in the soft glow of the alley light, there was something in her eyes, something real. He swallowed, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He glanced down at Tyler, whose eyes were still fixed on the ground, lost in his own world of silence. Tyler needed something, someone who believed in him, someone who could give him the chance to hope again. Maybe, just maybe, this girl, this stranger could offer that. Turning back to the man, Franklin nodded slowly. "I don't know who you are or why you're telling me this, but my son, he deserves a chance. And if she can give him that, I'm not walking away." The man seemed to read the finality in Franklin's words. With a heavy sigh, he stepped back into the shadows. "You've been warned, Franklin. Just remember, some things you can't undo." And with that, Franklin and Tyler stepped into the darkness, leaving behind a warning and a father's hope. Hope that had finally found its way into a place Franklin never expected. This was more than just a moment of uncertainty. It was the beginning of a journey into the unknown, one that would change Franklin's life, his relationship with his son, and his understanding of what truly matters. The heart of the city and the weight of doubt Franklin's heart pounded in his chest as he wheeled Tyler through the darkened alley, following Laya's quick steps as if she were leading them into some hidden corner of the city, a place where even the shadows felt like secrets. Each step felt like a risk. His mind buzzed with doubts, questions he couldn't quite answer. What if this was a scam? What if this was a mistake? What was I thinking? Tyler sat silently, but Franklin could see the faintest spark in his son's eyes, something that hadn't been there in months. The boy's grip on the wheelchair handles tightened, not out of fear but out of something else. Hope? Or was it just the desperation to believe in something, anything, that might change his life? Laya led them to a narrow, dimly lit courtyard, behind a row of crumbling buildings. The air smelled of damp concrete and old, forgotten rain. There were no streetlights here, just the faint glow of what could have been a broken lantern. It felt like a place where the city's heart had gone to die. "This is it," Laya said, her voice calm but full of purpose. Franklin stopped in his tracks, the weight of the decision pressing harder on him with each breath. "This doesn't feel right." He looked at Tyler, whose gaze was already fixed on the door in front of them. Something about the building, old, worn down, neglected, made Franklin's chest tighten. The place was like a physical manifestation of everything he had feared in his own life. The decay of dreams, the inevitability of failure. "What is this place?" he asked, his voice steady despite the tension gripping his throat. "Who else is here?" Laya paused, her eyes narrowing as she looked back at him. "It's just us," she said simply. "Nobody's going to hurt you here, but if you want to go back, you can. There's no shame in that." Her words hung in the air for a moment, a strange mixture of comfort and finality. Franklin swallowed, hard fighting the sudden impulse to just turn around and take Tyler back to the familiarity of their condo, the sterile safety of the hospital. But Tyler spoke then, his small voice cracking the thick silence between them. "I want to try, Dad," Tyler said, barely above a whisper. But there was something about his tone, a quiet determination that took Franklin by surprise. Tyler hadn't said anything like that in so long. He had been resigned to his fate, trapped in a body that refused to obey him. But now there was a glimmer of life, something in him willing to fight. For what? Franklin couldn't quite answer, but his son's words, fragile as they were enough to push him forward. Laya opened the creaking door and they stepped inside. The room was small, lit by sunlight streaming through cracks in the ceiling. The air smelled faintly of lemon balm and something old, something ancient. It was an odd mixture of comfort and decay, like the kind of place where time stood still, where the weight of history and the pressing need for change collided. The woman inside was seated on a worn rug, her silver hair wrapped in a loose bun. She didn't look at them immediately, but her presence was undeniable. She was calm, almost unnervingly still. "I've been waiting for you," the woman said, her voice like a soft river, steady and unhurried. Franklin hesitated. He didn't know what he was expecting, but this certainly wasn't it. The room felt peaceful, yes, but there was something unsettling about it too, like it belonged in another time, another world even. It was the kind of space where the concept of time itself seemed irrelevant. The woman finally turned her eyes toward them. Her gaze was steady, almost too steady, as though she had seen all that needed to be seen. She studied Tyler without judgment, without sympathy, as though she were looking past him and into something far deeper. Franklin felt the familiar tension in his chest tighten. This was a world he didn't understand, and it made him nervous, made him feel small. He wasn't used to being out of control, and here everything about this moment felt out of his hands. "This is my son, Tyler," Franklin said, his voice now shaky. He's paralyzed." The woman nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. She didn't seem surprised. She simply reached for Tyler's chair and gently placed a hand on his knee. Tyler flinched slightly at the touch, but the woman didn't pull back. She closed her eyes, letting the silence stretch between them, and then she hummed softly, a tune that resonated in Franklin's bones like a forgotten memory. Franklin's stomach churned. "What is this?" But before he could voice his discomfort, Tyler let out a breath. I felt something," he whispered, his voice shaking. Franklin's heart stopped. "What?" he asked, his voice rising with urgency. Tyler looked up, his wide, eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and wonder. It was like something electric but soft. It was in my legs. Franklin's hand tightened around the wheelchair handles, his breath coming in short, uneven bursts. Was this possible? Was it even real? The woman's hands remained on Tyler's knees, and she opened her eyes. "Sometimes the body needs more than medicine," she said, her voice calm, almost soothing. "Sometimes it needs the spirit to believe. The body obeys the heart more than you think." Franklin's mind raced, but the words didn't make sense. Belief? What did belief have to do with this? He had spent months, years, chasing solutions from every corner of the medical world. He had tried everything. Everything that could be bought, everything that could be explained with science. But belief? What was that supposed to mean? Before he could voice his doubts, Tyler shifted in the chair, a slight tremor running through his arms. "Dad, I think I want to try standing," he said. Franklin's heart seized. Standing? But Tyler's legs, they had been useless for so long. This was impossible. But there was something in his son's eyes now. A spark that Franklin hadn't seen in months. "Tyler, no," Franklin said, his voice sharp. "You don't have to do this. We can go home. We'll find another way." But Tyler shook his head, his face set with determination. "I want to try, Dad. I need to try." The words hit Franklin harder than he expected. "I don't know if I can watch this," he thought, his chest tightening with fear. With a deep breath, he stepped back, allowing Tyler the space to try. And in that moment, as Tyler steadied himself, something in Franklin's mind shifted. His son was finally fighting for something. Something beyond the wheelchair, beyond the doctors, beyond the fear. Tyler was fighting for hope. Franklin watched, frozen as Tyler placed his trembling feet on the floor, his legs buckling under him. But he stood. Slowly, unsteadily, Tyler stood. The room felt like it was holding its breath, and then, against every rational instinct Franklin had, he watched as his son took a shaky step forward. It wasn't a miracle, but it was a start, and in that moment, Franklin realized he had been searching for answers in the wrong places. Perhaps, just perhaps, the healing they needed wasn't something that could be measured. Maybe it was something that could only be felt. Tyler's journey had only just begun. But for the first time in a long while, Franklin believed in the possibility of miracles. The weight of the moment was overwhelming, and yet Franklin felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. A new beginning and the power of belief. The weeks that followed that day in the dim-lit room were nothing short of extraordinary. Tyler's recovery, though slow and tentative, seemed to defy all medical logic. Every step he took, every inch of movement his legs regained, left Franklin in awe. The doctors, initially skeptical, now watched in disbelief as Tyler described feeling sensations in his legs, tingling in his calves, strange bursts of energy traveling up his thighs. They had no explanation, and that frustrated them, but it didn't matter. Franklin didn't need their validation anymore. Tyler was walking, Tyler was healing. It wasn't just the physical progress that changed. There was a subtle shift in the air between father and son. For the first time in over a year, Franklin felt like he was seeing his son again, really seeing him. Tyler's spirit had been broken, but now, as he took each shaky step, his eyes sparkled with something that hadn't been there before. Hope. One afternoon, as they practiced together in the living room, Tyler standing, faltering, but always moving forward, Franklin found himself leaning against the wall, fighting back tears. How had they gotten here? He had been so focused on the things he couldn't fix, on the ways money and influence couldn't help, that he had missed the one thing that mattered most: connection. In his relentless pursuit of success, he had forgotten what truly made life worth living: love, trust, belief in each other. Tyler, breathing hard but grinning from ear to ear, caught Franklin's gaze and said, "I think I might be able to try out for basketball this spring." His voice, full of uncertainty but determination, rang through the room. Franklin smiled, but this time it wasn't just a smile of encouragement. It was a smile of pride, of realization. Tyler had found his will again. And with that, Franklin knew nothing could stop him now. But even as Tyler's steps grew steadier, Franklin found himself haunted by the memory of Laya, the girl who had sparked this change in his son's life. He had tried to find her, visited shelters, asked around the city, but it was as though she had vanished. No one seemed to know where. She had gone, and the more Franklin searched, the more elusive she became. It wasn't until one late afternoon, a month after their first encounter, that Franklin found her again. It was in the most unexpected place, a dilapidated corner near Roosevelt and Loomis, far from the polished streets where he usually roamed. There she was, sitting against a wall, her arms wrapped around a younger boy who looked to be in pain, clutching his arm as if it were sprained. Laya didn't look up at first. Her presence was just as quiet and powerful as before. But when she noticed Franklin, a small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. She didn't speak right away, just looked at him. No judgment, no pity, just recognition. "Laya," Franklin said, his voice trembling. "I've been looking for you." She didn't ask why. She didn't seem surprised. She simply stood, helping the boy adjust his injured arm, then turned her calm, steady gaze on Franklin. "His name is Jaden," she said softly, indicating the boy, who looked no older than 6. "He fell off a dumpster yesterday. His arm's hurt, but I've been keeping an eye on him." Franklin's heart tightened. He had been so focused on finding answers for his son, so absorbed in the miracle unfolding in his life, that he had forgotten about those who still needed help, those who didn't have a chance to escape the streets, who didn't have the luxury of hope. "I can help you," Franklin said quietly, his throat tight with emotion. "I can get you a place to stay, get you off the streets. Please, Laya, let me help." Laya shook her head gently. "This is where I'm needed," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I don't need a home, Franklin. I need purpose. These kids, people like Jaden, they don't need saving, they need someone who sees them, someone who won't walk away." Franklin swallowed hard. He had seen it in her eyes. She wasn't just helping others, she was giving them a chance to heal. She was giving them the same thing she had given Tyler: belief. And that was something money couldn't buy, no matter how much he had. "I don't understand," Franklin said, his voice faltering. "Why do you do this? Why not accept help?" Laya paused for a moment, looking down at Jaden, who was now clutching her hand. "Because sometimes," she said softly, "help isn't what they need. It's someone to listen, someone who stays when everyone else leaves." Her words hit Franklin harder than anything had in a long time. He realized then that she was not just a healer of bodies, she was a healer of hearts. She was the kind of person who gave without expecting, who believed without needing proof. Franklin pulled out his business card, the same one he had given to Laya on the day they first met. "Take it," he said, holding it out to her. "If you ever change your mind, if you ever want a chance at something different." Laya took the card, folded it neatly, and tucked it into her coat pocket. "Thank you," she said, her voice low and sincere. "But I'm not leaving. Not yet. If you ever need to remember how to believe, Franklin, I'll be around." With that, she turned, walking away, leaving Franklin standing in the street, a strange warmth spreading through his chest. He didn't know if he would ever see her again, but in that moment he understood. He understood that Laya's gift wasn't in fixing what was broken. It was in showing others that they were never truly broken to begin with. And as he watched her disappear into the distance, with Jaden by her side, Franklin realized something else. Healing doesn't always begin with answers. Sometimes it begins with presence. Tyler's journey wasn't over. Franklin knew that. But for the first time, he didn't need to worry. He didn't need to have all the answers. He just needed to be there, and with that simple truth, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. Tyler would keep walking, and so would he. Together. The story of Franklin and Tyler was not just about a miraculous recovery. It was about the transformation of a man who learned that some things cannot be bought or controlled. Healing is not just a physical process. It is an emotional one. The journey to healing is not always clear or easy, but it is filled with moments of hope, belief, and love. And sometimes the greatest miracles happen when we stop trying to fix everything and simply choose to believe.